Welcome to the Mind.
What do we really mean by genius?
Matters.
Giftedness is so much more than an academic label.
Podcast.
We tend to think of gifted as kids being good at everything across the board.
An exploration of giftedness.
Originals are nonconformists.
Creativity.
People who not only have new ideas.
Intelligence.
They're the people you want to bet on.
In childhood.
I like to learn about things, but I like to learn my way.
And beyond. This is the Mind Matters Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 11 of the Mind Matters podcast. We'll be talking about acceleration, also known as grade skipping, and a lot of other different ways that you can accelerate students to move them through the curriculum rapidly. We'll be talking with Dr. Ann Lupkowski-Shoplik of the University of Iowa, and she is an expert in this area. I can't wait to talk to her. We really appreciate our listeners, and we're connecting with a lot of them on social media. Hey there to Jen Torbick-Merrill, also known as @LaughingAtChaos on Twitter. And of course, we really want to thank our new followers on Instagram. Our handle is Mind Matters Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, so take a minute and look us up. You can also find us on Twitter @MindMattersPod. Acceleration is a widely misunderstood and underused tool for high-ability kids. Today, we'll talk about this intervention, various ways to implement it, and what the research says about it. We'll also address the stigma of acceleration, why educators, administrators, policymakers, all of whom understand the varied and unique needs of students, bristle at the idea of enrolling a child who is not quite yet 5 into kindergarten, even though they're already doing math and reading. And why do they push back against the parent who is asking for their child to be placed in a math class a year or two above their current grade level when the child clearly can complete the work at that level? Dr. Ann Lupkowski-Shoplik is the administrator for the Acceleration Institute and Research at the Belin-Blank Center for Gifted Education at the University of Iowa. She's also an adjunct professor there. And some of you may have heard of the 2015 report on academic acceleration, A Nation Empowered. Ann was one of the co-editors of this volume, and she was also a contributor to its predecessor, A Nation Deceived, which was published in 2004. These volumes take an in-depth look at the research surrounding various types of acceleration. If you'd like to download them, they're free. You can go to our website at mindmatterspodcast.com. Also, later we'll talk to a 16-year-old college junior about his experience with acceleration. That's all coming up.
On a recent episode of Mind Matters.
We'll be talking about video games and giftedness. I know when I was growing up, we were talking like Oregon Trail and Carmen Sandiego, you know.
People dying of dysentery.
Yes, dying of dysentery. It was always very tragic.
Games went from being something you would play in the same room together to something that is not even an option in most, AAA titles anymore.
What would you say is the relationship between gaming and giftedness?
For the gifted population, the simple is complex and the complex is simple. So there's a draw in the sense that there's a quick path to mastery. And I think for a gifted individual, there's always a draw to doing something very well. The issue becomes when they put all their eggs in that basket.
That's episode 2, available at mindmatterspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. This is the Mind Matters Podcast.
When a discussion arises about educating gifted kids, it's a sure bet someone will bring up acceleration. And when it comes to that subject, few people know more than today's guest.
Hi, I'm Ann Lupkowski-Shoplik, and I'm the administrator for the Acceleration Institute and Research at the Belin-Blank Center at the University of Iowa.
Acceleration is one of those things that I feel like a lot of people know about, but not a lot of people know a lot about. What is acceleration, and what are some of the various ways that acceleration can be implemented?
When most of us think about academic acceleration, the first thing that comes to mind is grade skipping. And it's true, that's one form of acceleration, but there are actually at least 20 different forms of acceleration. So we can think about things like early admission to kindergarten or first grade, certainly skipping a grade somewhere in the middle, early entrance to college, graduating from college early. Those are all grade-associated types of acceleration. But then there's also subject matter acceleration, where a student might stay in class with the same age group for most of the day, but then for one subject or maybe a couple of subjects, the student would move up to another grade. Students can advance in a subject area through distance learning courses. They can participate in advanced placement courses in high school. There might be an international baccalaureate program. So there are lots and lots of different ways that students can accelerate.
I feel like there are a lot of myths about acceleration that exist. What are some of the myths about acceleration that you'd like to dispel?
The most important one is the idea that an accelerated student will be some type of a social misfit or outcast. And honestly, when I talk to people, like if I talk to my neighbors and I say, well, I do a lot of work with kids who are accelerated, they all get kind of pale and nervous. And they say to me, well, what about the socialization aspects? So that's immediately the first thing that comes to mind when we're thinking about acceleration. And we have research that tells us that actually kids who accelerate do just fine socially. They make friends. Some of them are leaders. They feel like they fit in with the other students, even though the kids are a little bit older than they are. So they feel satisfied in that way with the acceleration.
When I first began teaching in gifted education, it was very close after A Nation Deceived was released. And I remember reading that and feeling like even through my gifted education certification training, I had not gotten a lot of information on how to accelerate or what the benefits were. Then when A Nation Empowered was released, even more so, it's just like, we just need to continue to do this. But I know that there is such a resistance from school administrations, from teachers, from parents too, just for those very reasons that they think it's going to be bad for their social emotional development, or it's not going to be successful later on down the line. Like they worry about, predicting the future. Where do you think that stigma comes from? I mean, why is that stigma surrounding acceleration? Why does it persist?
In a nutshell, it's because we don't educate the educators about acceleration. As you mentioned, you didn't receive formal coursework about acceleration, even though you were focusing on gifted students. It's an amazing disconnect between what the research tells us and what we do in practice. And certainly, A Nation Deceived was huge in terms of informing the public about acceleration and letting people know that it's well researched, there's lots of information to back this up, and it works, and there are ways that we can do this. I think people sort of have a gut feeling. They're really nervous about kids doing something different from what is typical. And so they just go with their gut. They think that I don't want to make this kid different, or I don't want to push this student, or maybe those parents are pushing the student. So, we, the teachers or the administrators, don't want to facilitate that. There's just a lot of nervousness surrounding acceleration.
I also feel like sometimes when I've spoken to administrators about it, because that's a lot of times who those decisions fall to, in addition to not really having any training or information on it, for some reason there's this perception that if they move forward and accelerate one student, then it's going to open this Pandoras Box. And I don't know, I just find that so frustrating as an advocate for gifted kids and someone who has seen the benefit of it for a lot of the students that I've worked with. How would you address that with those administrators or the people who are the decision makers in those situations?
Well, I agree. I've heard that same comment many times, that if we do it for this one student, we'll have to do it for everybody. And I think we have to maintain our focus on trying to match the curriculum and the level and the pace of the information the student is working with in school with their abilities and their aptitudes and what they've already learned. The focus really has to be on that match. And we recognize that kids are different from each other. Not every student is ready for that same page of that same textbook at exactly the same time. And if we begin recognizing that there really are individual differences, then we can look at the objective information that we can gather about kids and make good decisions. Administrators might be nervous because in their experience, it's been one person, say a principal, who made the decision about a student actually accelerating. And we certainly don't recommend that. We actually recommend that a team of people become involved in making the decision, and not to just say, yes, I think it's a good idea, or no, I don't think it's a good idea, but actually gather objective information from testing and from talking with the teachers and the parents and observing the student and looking at their physical development and their social development, all different aspects of their development. Then we can make good decisions. And I think when administrators see that, they see all the different things that we're thinking about and how we're gathering data to make good decisions, then they realize, okay, not everybody's going to be breaking down the door insisting that their kids be accelerated.
You mentioned earlier the Iowa Acceleration Scale, and that's a tool I've actually had the opportunity to use when I worked in the schools. When I recommend that to clients or educators, I always emphasize how it does look at the whole student. It really looks at all of those characteristics. So like one of the things that always stands out to me is it looks at whether or not the child has siblings who are in the grade level above, which most people wouldn't really think about, but that could have a big impact on whether or not that would be a successful situation for that child.
Even things like the student's birth date. If we're looking at early entrance to kindergarten, the decision's a lot easier if the student missed the cutoff for kindergarten by a month or a couple of weeks versus if the student is going to be 6 months younger than that cutoff.
What are some of your thoughts about early entrance to kindergarten? I'm in the St. Louis area, and Missouri has recently changed their laws. It used to be that a student was required to attend one full year at an accredited school for accredited kindergarten before they could enter first grade. So that was kind of a way that people would get through that loophole of having to be 5 before the August 1st cutoff date. And now they've changed it so that not only do you have to do 1 year at an accredited school, but you have to do 2 years, and then you could go back to a public school for second grade, which is in such contrast to our neighboring state of Illinois that has just passed some pretty progressive legislation about early entrance to kindergarten. So what are your thoughts about early entrance to kindergarten as an acceleration option?
Well, the research tells us that it's a good idea, as long as we're looking very carefully at the student and what they're ready to do, ready to learn. When we're considering early entrance to kindergarten, I guess some of the positive aspects about it, it minimizes social disruptions because we're putting the student into the group of friends that they'll have if they stay in that grade all the way through school. It'll be the same group of students. They're not going to be leaving one group and going into a new group. Also, it minimizes our concerns about skipping topics or having gaps in the student's background. We're not worried about academic credit. If a student skips a grade later on, we might be concerned about, are they going to have enough credits to graduate from high school or something like that. Also, the younger a student is when they start kindergarten or when they are accelerated, the less likely that student will be bored with the curriculum. And really, for all kids, when we're thinking about academic acceleration, the whole idea is to increase the level of challenge for them. We don't want kids to go to school thinking this is too easy, I can glide through it, I can get all my homework done on the bus, I don't have to do my homework because I know all the answers already, I don't have to study. When we do that, when we're setting kids up in a situation that's not challenging for them, we're actually teaching them very bad habits. When we're putting them in a situation where they are more challenged, where they have something to reach for, then they're learning good habits. They're learning study skills, they're learning to apply themselves, they're learning to get organized, etc. So it's very much a win-win situation if we're starting kids younger, if they're ready. If they go through the process and the students are seen as ready to enter kindergarten early, there's a lot of positive evidence that that's a good decision.
How can parents and educators really identify the children who are good candidates for acceleration, whether that's grade level acceleration or subject level acceleration or other types?
Well, so there are a lot of different indicators. And for younger children, if it's the parents and maybe preschool teachers who are observing them, they might notice things like excellent verbal ability and, talking at an early age and talking in very complete sentences at a younger age than is typical. They might demonstrate early mathematical ability. I remember a story a parent told me about a 3-year-old who was actually taking a bath and started reading the back of the shampoo bottle in the bathtub. And the parent didn't know where this came from. Somehow this child had started learning how to read on her own. So that was very exciting. And parents have told me anecdotes about young students who kids before they entered kindergarten were adding things like 15,921 plus 40,857 correctly. So there are lots of stories that we hear from families, and I think it's important for administrators and for teachers to pay attention to those stories and to ask for specific examples as they're looking at a potential candidate for either early entrance to kindergarten or some type of acceleration in school. And we want to see kids who are motivated, who want to be accelerated. That's really important too, right? That's kind of one of the deal breakers. If the student says, no way, I don't want to be accelerated, I think it would be a real problem, or, we wouldn't expect a successful acceleration experience if the student is very resistant. We want that student to be on board. And of course, I'm talking about a lot of sort of anecdotal information, but then we want to gather objective information. So we would recommend an individual assessment for the student, including IQ testing and aptitude testing and achievement testing, figuring out what their capabilities are, what they've already learned, and then what they're ready to learn.
Can you talk a little bit more about the achievement testing portion and the best ways to implement that? Because I know some districts use, for example, their district-created benchmarks, and that might be a piece of it, but what would you recommend for that type of testing?
So you can use nationally standardized grade level tests to compare students to other kids in their current grade level. And that's really useful. You want a student who's performing really well compared to other kids in their current grade. I wouldn't recommend considering acceleration for a student who is well below grade level or just at grade level, but for the kids who are, above grade level. And if we're talking about a full grade acceleration, then we certainly want to look at all the different academic areas. But if we're looking at a student who might be accelerated in a particular subject, then we would recommend focusing on that subject area. For example, mathematics. We want to test the student specifically in math to see, what their aptitudes are, what they're ready to learn, and what they've already achieved. One of the big concerns when kids accelerate in math is what kinds of gaps they might have. They might skip some important information. And I certainly recognize that, but it's really easy to fill in those gaps by giving the kids the tests, like final exams or whatever for the particular topics that they would be skipping or the grade level that they would be skipping. Give them the final exams and figure out what they know and what they don't know. And then I've seen students work with a tutor for a very short period of time, maybe 2 weeks, just a few sessions where they fill in the gaps that the student didn't know, and then they're able to move ahead and to accelerate. And that's certainly a much better situation than having a student sit through the entire year of mathematics and learn things or study things that they already mastered just because they missed a couple of concepts.
I feel like that's just such a situation where you can really stifle a child's motivation and love for learning. They're just forced to sit through something that they already know, and then they hate school, and then they become underachievers. And, there are a lot of issues that come along with not accelerating. What else would you add to that? I mean, what are some of the other concerns that can happen if we don't accelerate students?
Right. I do worry about kids learning bad habits, that they learn that school is not hard. They learn not to work to get high grades. They can learn lots of perfectionistic things too, right? That they learn a way to kind of stimulate themselves or make themselves stay interested is, okay, I'm going to try to get the most perfect score I can, and I will look down on myself if I don't get a perfect score. And then that kind of perpetuates itself. We want kids from a fairly young age to learn how to make mistakes and to recover from those mistakes and to learn that working hard is important, that there are things that are difficult, and that here are ways that we can manage the challenge. I don't like to see kids wait until they go off to college, on their own, and all of a sudden they're faced with really challenging courses. That's very discouraging. We want to see the kids get those types of experiences when they're young and when they're learning skills of adjusting to those kinds of things.
What are some of the situations where acceleration should not be considered an option?
On the Iowa acceleration scale, we talk about 3 critical items. And you mentioned one earlier, if a student would be moving into a grade with a sibling. So this is for grade skipping, if they'd be moving up where they have a brother or sister who's a year older. And the reason that we don't recommend acceleration in this situation is because of the family dynamics. It has an impact both on the accelerated student and on the non-accelerated student, as well as on the rest of the family. And we really don't know what the long-term implications are of this younger student going into the older student's territory and, doing having their teacher and their friends and all of that. And somehow, the older student might start thinking, well, I guess I'm not very smart. My younger brother is in class with me, or my younger sister is with class with me. Mm-hmm. So that would be one of the situations where, that's one of the critical items that we think about. Another one, if the student doesn't want to be accelerated, then that would be a strong recommendation not to accelerate. And then thirdly, we also look at IQ testing when we're considering a grade skip. And if the student earns an IQ that's less than a standard deviation above the mean, and by that I mean if a student has a score of 115 or below on an IQ test, that means they're average or they're high average, and that's fine. That's indicative of a good, solid performance in that grade level.
That's interesting because I think a lot of people assume that in order to be accelerated, a student should be identified as a gifted learner. But if the suggested IQ score is a 115, those may not be students who are necessarily in gifted programs, depending on the district where they attend school.
Gifted programs tend to focus on verbal ability, and they tend to focus on kids who are sort of all around gifted. So in a lot of places, they're looking for kids who have an IQ of 130 or above, or their cutoff is a 127 or something like that. But students who need acceleration or who need more challenge in particular subject areas might not be in that gifted program. We would never recommend making admittance into the gifted program a requirement for academic acceleration. I mentioned math before. So let's think about a mathematically talented student. Well, there are lots and lots of math talented kids that aren't in the gifted program because it's verbally oriented, but yet they need more challenge in mathematics. And so it's perfectly fine for those kids to be accelerated in math.
In terms of acceleration as an intervention in today's schools, is it prevalent? Do you feel like it's gaining traction? Is it losing ground? Where do you see that momentum going?
Well, certainly the report, A Nation Deceived, that came out in 2004 was, the beginning of some changes. And I think we've moved the needle a little bit in terms of acceleration. You mentioned that the state of Illinois has a new acceleration policy, and we're seeing that happen in more and more states, where the states are actually developing academic acceleration policies and working with their districts to make sure that it's implemented across the state. I would say it's hard to have good measures of what percentage of kids are being accelerated. Certainly it's a small number. And in my experience, it should be more kids that should be accelerating. It's hard for me to name a number, this is how many kids should be accelerating, because the situations are all so unique. But, like I said, I'm happy to see that we've kind of moved the needle and that it's something that's considered more often than it used to be.
When students are accelerated, what do you notice are some of the obstacles that they have to overcome?
Some of them include other people's assumptions. Other people look at them as potential social misfits, that might be an issue. Although our research shows us that, and I'm talking in the field in general, the research that has been generated shows that kids do fit in with the older students and they feel a lot of satisfaction, and the older kids are satisfied too. Sometimes when there's a big age difference, the older students look at that younger accelerated student more like a mascot or a pal, rather than an equal or a true friend or whatever. But they're certainly very respectful of that student's abilities, and they tend to go to those kids when they want to do group work or whatever, because they know that student often has the right answer. I was involved in a research study a number of years ago where we actually talked to accelerated students on the phone and asked them about their experiences and what were some of the challenges that they dealt with. And so many of them mentioned the fact that they were too young to drive. Their friends or their classmates were starting to drive, but they hadn't yet had their 16th birthday. So they still had to have their parents drive them places. And they said sometimes that was a little bit embarrassing or frustrating to them. For kids who maybe skipped the last year of high school, there's a lot of concern about missing things like the prom or, other important events of senior year. So those are, I don't know if I'd call them obstacles, but they're just sort of temporary inconveniences. And that's actually a phrase that a lot of the students in the research study talked about, that these were temporary inconveniences, that, being a little bit younger than everybody else, not being allowed to date, or, those kinds of things were temporarily issues, but not in the big picture a big problem. And they talked about how in the long run, it was really worth it. They're glad that they accelerated. And a number of the students actually talked about the gift of time. They felt like they had an extra year or an extra 2 years that they could do something with.
Oftentimes, a parent will see something in their child that indicates to them that acceleration might be a good option, but they don't bring it up for fear of being that parent. They don't want to be a disruptor. Oftentimes, teachers are just too overloaded and the signs of struggle are missed. The student is left to fend for themselves. Parents have to know it's okay to say something.
I say to parents, if you don't advocate for your child, who will, right? We want to, certainly we don't want parents, demanding acceleration when it's not appropriate for their student. But if parents have the evidence and they feel strongly that this is something that should be pursued, I certainly encourage them. I think we have to start from a point where we assume the best of the other person. Educators go into education because they like kids and they want kids to be successful and they want to, provide situations that will be helpful to the students. So when an educator says, no, I don't believe in acceleration, it comes from a place where they really are trying to do the best for the student. And the parent might be in the situation where the parent is actually better informed about acceleration, about the research. They might have a lot more information than that educator that they're talking with. So I think we have to tread lightly in that kind of situation and kind of be gentle about the way we're talking with the other folks about acceleration. Here's some information I found. I invite you to read this, whatever. And when A Nation Deceived was first developed, there's the first volume. Even though it came out in 2004, it's still very pertinent. So volume 1 of A Nation Deceived is written for people who don't know a lot about acceleration. It's basically written for the educated layperson. And it's a quick read. Somebody can look through that fairly quickly, and it dispels a lot of the myths about acceleration. Also, in the 2015 publication, A Nation Empowered, we also have a volume 1 that was developed again for the educated layperson. And they can flip through that fairly quickly and see a lot of stories about kids who've accelerated, teachers who've accelerated, parents who've had an experience with their child being accelerated. And those stories really resonate. I like to look at the research and to consider, there are hundreds of kids in this study or thousands of kids in this study and we're finding this evidence, but those individual stories really resonate. And maybe we're talking with an educator who had one bad experience with acceleration for whatever reason, and that's what stops them. You know, we do certainly worry. We don't want to be setting up a situation that's going to be a problem for that student. But at the same time, we have to kind of take courage with all of this research that's telling us that so many kids have experienced acceleration and have been very successful at it. Also, in terms of like strategies or tips for parents or for teachers, again, really trying to create an atmosphere where we're all on the same team and we're trying to solve this problem together, or we're trying to work through this situation together. And I really recommend also looking at the objective tools that we have for making decisions about acceleration, whether it's the Iowa Acceleration Scale, whether it's the talent search model where we give above level testing to help figure out, is the student ready to advance in a particular subject area? And then also for parents, I certainly recommend finding an advocate. Maybe the gifted coordinator in the school district is also accepting of the idea of acceleration. That person could be a good advocate for that family. Or maybe there's a classroom teacher that knows that student well and can give very specific examples about how advanced the student is and how ready the student is to move forward.
Oftentimes, the question goes from what if we do to what if we don't. Missing an opportunity to change someone's educational experience for the better leaves questions of what if.
Let's really think that over. Not accelerating or not doing anything is a decision. So, let's look at all the research. Let's look at the objective information we have about the student. If we don't accelerate, what are the other choices? Are there other ways to challenge the student? Are there other situations that we can put the student in that would be more satisfying? Let's think about all of that. But always, if we just put it aside and just proceed as we were, that's still a decision.
Ann Lupkowski-Shoplik from the Belin-Blank Center for Gifted Education, many thanks.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
A talk with a junior at the University of Missouri St. Louis, who is also 16 years old, next.
To reach the Mind Matters podcast, go to our website, mindmatterspodcast.com, and click on Contact. Follow us on Twitter @MindMattersPod, on Facebook @Mind Matters Podcast, or you can reach our YouTube channel through our website.
The use of acceleration is growing among educators. There are many strategies to accelerate students. Early enrollment in kindergarten, grade skipping, subject acceleration, dual enrollment, or early enrollment in college, just to name a few. Here's one student who is benefiting from acceleration.
My name is Ethan Ankenbrandt. I'm 16 years old, and I'm going to be a junior at University of Missouri St. Louis. I'm a gender studies major.
At age 16, Ethan will be the youngest junior at the University of Missouri St. Louis, by far. Ethan is a gifted kid and has been in gifted programming most of his life.
So the first gifted program I was in was one of the pull-out programs when I was in kindergarten and first grade. And that was really great to be surrounded by other gifted kids and kind of get that side of things. And then when I was in second grade, I was entered into an exceptionally gifted full-time program. And that was the best experience of my entire life because I was with a small group of incredibly like-minded people.
That early program was largely self-guided, meaning the kids were given a lot of latitude.
There wasn't a lot of structure involved. The instructors kind of just let the kids show their interests and explore those.
Ethan enjoyed the freedom of that early gifted program.
Through elementary school, the program was fantastic. It really was well-rounded and fulfilled all the needs that I needed as a gifted student. But then after middle school started, they kind of just threw us into higher level classes, and that was rough. It was difficult kind of going from such a small environment to being thrown in with kids 3-4 years older in high school classes. And that was a really hard adjustment period for me. And then after 7th grade, so I lasted through 2 years of that.
He decided there had to be a better option.
I skipped 8th grade and enrolled in high school which also wasn't exactly right for me.
What wasn't right about it?
It felt limiting. The classes were difficult in an organizational sense, but not a content sense.
Kids often find the most challenging aspect of acceleration is the social piece. As Ann mentioned earlier, it's sometimes hard to earn equal status from fellow students. Ethan felt a mixture of these things. He felt social fulfillment, but he also felt social isolation.
Because I felt that I belonged with older students mentally, and yet they didn't view me as a peer.
He was attending private school at the time and decided to see if public school would be different.
I was at a private Catholic school, and originally after leaving that school, I had decided that I was going to go to a public high school. And I had thought that it was because it was a small private school that I was having issues with it. But I really realized that it was just because high school is a terrible time for pretty much every person, and I had a segue out, so I took it.
Ethan decided to try something pretty extraordinary. At age 14, he wanted to go straight to college.
There were a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails sent to pretty much every university in our area. And UMSL was the most accommodating, so they essentially said that they had never seen a case like me and that they were willing to try and work with me in getting me enrolled.
Now that he was there, he had to show the university that he could do it.
So when I first started, I was technically dual enrolled, and it was definitely a process working with their office, kind of convincing them that I was able to do the classes. It's become a lot easier now. I have a 4.0 for my first 2 years, and that's really kind of proven my worth in a sense, and they're less hesitant to enroll me in challenging and rigorous courses.
So how did Ethan convince the administrators at UMSL to grant him the early entrance he wanted? He gave them the usual documentation, but it was something else that convinced him that he was ready.
So they asked for my transcripts and my ACT score, the standard college admittance things, and then they asked for my background in the gifted program. And that went a really long way with getting me in and enrolled.
And then he was in.
I always remember sitting in my first class. I just didn't really know what to expect, but it went a lot more smoothly than I could have anticipated. I expected people to assume that I was younger, but they didn't. A lot of my classmates don't know that I'm younger until I become close with them and tell them.
It was a completely different social experience.
The main difference between high school and college is that high school students get involved in what I like to call social bull, and I think those couple years of maturity that college students gain really allows them to be more accepting and mature.
Convincing a school is one thing. Convincing family is sometimes even more of a challenge.
My family as a whole, they were kind of split in their responses and reactions to it. My grandparents were kind of skeptical at first. They wanted me to get a high school experience, but I always told them that their high school experience was very different from the high school experience that I would get. But then, my parents were very supportive and really knew that it was the right decision.
There's one common theme that's prevalent among students who choose acceleration.
I really enjoy the time aspect. High school is really inefficient. You're there all day learning about things that you don't necessarily need, whereas in college you can choose your classes and it has a much more flexible schedule.
Ethan's experience isn't commonplace. Acceleration is growing in popularity, but there are still challenges.
I feel like there are a lot of hoops to jump through currently for gifted students seeking acceleration, and I feel like administrators on all levels of education can be more flexible and understanding of students and create individualized plans more so than they're doing now.
Just as Ann discussed earlier, acceleration isn't necessarily for every student. There are a lot of factors to consider beyond simply the academic rigor an advanced student needs.
I think there are a lot of factors. Maturity is definitely one of them. Social skills. I think if someone is lacking those social skills, they really won't succeed in such an adult environment.
Schools set dates based on the calendar for when students are able to enroll in school, instead of providing opportunities based on ability. Does this make sense?
To a certain extent, I feel that segregating children by age is limiting, but I think it does have its values too. I don't think I would be as socially fulfilled as I am now if I wasn't around similar age peers outside of college. I'm a swimmer, so I get that peer exposure through swimming. And without that, I wouldn't have been as happy.
So what does the career path for this young college student look like?
So I want to go into business. We have a family business in corporate dentistry. And right now I'm getting a gender studies degree, and people always ask me, they're like, oh, what are you going to do with that? I'm just getting it as a liberal arts degree because I really enjoy it. And I eventually will learn business through experience.
Flexibility is a capability to adapt to new, different, or changing requirements. Teaching students to think flexibly is almost always a component of gifted education programs. FFOE, anyone? And it's frequently part of the general education curriculum. We teach our students to be flexible because it is a vital skill in our world. We need it in order to solve problems in the workplace, compromise with peers, and adjust to changing circumstances. We all must be flexible in our daily lives. So why are schools so rigid when it comes to acceleration? There are so many ways that schools can provide appropriate challenge to bright kids, and there is no reason to hold them back. For those that would claim differentiation is enough, I would reply, maybe, but not necessarily. Does the teacher actually have enough time to create meaningful and challenging activities for the few students who need them? Why not consider acceleration as an option? Let's think flexibly about the best ways to meet kids' needs and bring awareness about the many ways to successfully accelerate high-ability students. Thanks for being here. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time.
1, 2, 3. I've been feeling so small. Watch the clock ticking off the wall. But tonight I'm letting it go. Spend my coin for sure. I'm gonna be myself, or I could be someone else. No one's stopping me now. I'm gonna skip my breaks. I'm gonna make mistakes. I just wanna feel alive. It's just what I do when I'm out, so try not to hold me down. Feel alive when I'm in this town. Look at those beautiful stars. I wanna drive a faster car. Nothing can break me. No, no, nothing can break me. Try not to hold me down. Feel alive when I'm in this town. Look at those beautiful stars. I wanna take a trip to Mars. Nothing can break me. No, no, nothing can break me. I want to drive a faster car.
Thanks for listening to the Mind Matters podcast with Emily Kircher-Morris. To learn more about us and our mission, go to mindmatterspodcast.com. If you'd like to show your support for Mind Matters, find us in Apple iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and leave us a positive review. Start a discussion and follow us on Twitter @MindMattersPod or on Facebook at facebook.com/MindMattersPodcast. Help spread the word about the Mind Matters podcast.
I'm gonna skip my breaks, I'm gonna make mistakes. Try not to hold me down. Feel alive when I'm in this town. Look at the beautiful stars. I wanna take a trip to Mars. Nothing can break me. No, no, nothing can break me.
Mind Matters is a production of Morris Creative Services.